Welcome to ASMR Lunar Rainbow. If you're new here, a very warm welcome to you. On this channel, we dive into whispered horror, ghost stories, and paranormal ASMR that blur the lines between sleep ASMR and spooky storytelling. I hope you enjoy. On today's episode, we have the haunting of the Sallie House. It is the true account of Debra and Tony Pickman's ordeal. Situated on a quiet street in the historic town of Atchison, Kansas, the unassuming White House at 508 North 2nd Street masks a legend that has grown to near mythic proportions. From the outside, the home looks modest, like countless small-town residences across America. Yet it has earned a place among the country's most infamous haunted sites, known today as the Sallie House. This is the harrowing story of Tony and Debra Pickman, a young couple whose lives become entangled in a supernatural drama. The testimony of inexplicable scratches, apparitions, and poltergeist activity has fascinated paranormal enthusiasts for decades. Throughout the years, the house has consistently drawn attention from researchers, psychic mediums, and thrill seekers alike. What follows is the tale of how one ordinary couple stepped into a world of unexplained terror and how the identity of a ghostly child named Sallie became intertwined with their very real nightmares. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, the house at 508 North 2nd Street was reportedly home to a doctor who treated patients in a makeshift examination room near the front. Local legend holds that one day a frantic mother rushed her daughter, later referred to as Sallie, into the doctor's office. The child was said to be experiencing severe abdominal pain diagnosed as appendicitis. According to this legend, the doctor began surgery before the anesthetic had fully taken effect and the young girl died on the operating table. Supposedly, her spirit never left the house. Over the decades, neighbors whispered of strange lights appearing in windows late at night, even when no one was home. Tenants came and went with quick turnover rates, claiming discomfort, eerie sounds, or odd feelings they could never fully explain. Children playing near the property talked of a mysterious little girl who watched them from a distance, but the sightings and rumors, while persistent, never became a fully formed haunting legend until much later when Tony and Debra Pickman moved in. Tony and Debra Pickman were newlyweds, filled with excitement as they prepared to start a family. By all accounts, they were looking forward to a quiet life in Atchison. Tony worked at a local business and Debra was eager to settle into the role of a homemaker. When they found the rental property at 508 North 2nd Street, it seemed perfect, cozy, affordable, and near Tony's extended family. They signed a lease believing that they would spend their first few years of marriage laying a foundation for the future. But unbeknownst to them, this seemingly innocent house already had a reputation that reached beyond rumor, one that would soon uproot the normalcy they cherished. From the moment the Pickmans moved into the house, in late 1992, a subtle unease took hold. Debra would later say that she occasionally felt a sensation of being watched, though she brushed it off as her own nerves, attributing it to the stress of moving and setting up a home. Tony, more practical-minded, also noticed the unusual energy but chose to ignore it. Neither wanted to sour the excitement of their new life together. Friends and family who dropped by offered compliments on the house's charm. However, a few acquaintances admitted they felt strangely cold or uncomfortable in certain rooms, particularly the upstairs nursery, where the couple planned to welcome their first child. In these early days, the unsettling sensations were easy to dismiss, yet seeds of anxiety were quietly being planted. Long before the strange occurrences began, Debra had nurtured a deep fascination with the paranormal. An avid reader of ghost legends and supernatural accounts, she often immersed herself in books and documentaries about haunted places and unexplained phenomena. This long-standing interest meant that when the subtle, eerie signs started to appear in the house, Debra was exceptionally attuned to them. Rather than dismissing the odd noises or inexplicable movements as mere quirks of an old home, her keen curiosity drove her to document every unusual event and seek out further information on local ghost stories. Her proactive approach and background interest not only influenced how she interpreted the growing disturbances, but also pushed the investigation deeper into the house's mysterious history. In contrast to Debra's long-standing fascination with ghost legends, Tony had little interest in the paranormal. Raised with a strong emphasis on logic and practicality, he viewed the house's odd occurrences as nothing more than quirks of an aging building. To Tony, flickering lights, creaking doors, and even the unsettling chill in the upstairs nursery were easily explained by faulty wiring, drafts, or the natural settling of an old structure. While Debra meticulously documented every unusual event and sought out local legends, Tony maintained that there was always a rational explanation lurking behind what others might hastily label as supernatural. Small oddities soon emerged. Lights seemed to switch off when no one was near them, or occasionally turn on by themselves. Doors that were firmly closed in the evening would be found open the next morning, sometimes wide open, sometimes only slightly ajar. Debra initially thought Tony might have gone into rooms for tools or supplies. Tony suspected Debra might have done the same. It was only after a few uncomfortable exchanges, each insisting they hadn't touched the doors, that the possibility of something else began to creep into their minds. Tony's brother came to help move furniture one weekend and commented on how cold the upstairs hallway felt, even though the Kansas summer heat had made the rest of the house muggy. No one thought to call it paranormal at that point, but the cumulative effect of these little incidents started to make Tony uneasy, even if he rarely admitted it aloud. The nursery, prepared lovingly for the baby the couple expected, became a focal point of unsettling events. Toys were rearranged when no one was in the room. A small stuffed bear that Debra distinctly remembered setting on a shelf was found lying in the middle of the floor on multiple occasions. She tried to rationalize it as something she or Tony had done, absent-mindedly, but the occurrences were persistent. On one occasion, Debra distinctly recalled placing a new baby blanket over the crib's railing. Hours later, she found it folded neatly inside a dresser drawer. Tony, confused by her questions, denied any knowledge of moving it. Again, this was not the kind of occurrence that felt outright threatening. Instead, it was bewildering, just enough to stir an undercurrent of mild dread. In some retellings of the Sallie House story, there are accounts that mention an eerie detail in the nursery. On occasion, toys or dolls were found arranged in a circular pattern, while Tony and Debra Pickman's primary account focus on the more dramatic manifestations such as unexplained movements, flickering lights, and physical marks. The circular setup of toys appears in some secondary reports. This detail, though not universally confirmed, adds another layer to the legend, suggesting that even the everyday items in the house might have been manipulated by an unseen force. After the birth of their son, the couple's experiences shifted from mild annoyances to events of a distinctly more alarming nature. Tony began to wake up with scratches on his body. At first, he attributed them to the normal hazards of daily life. Perhaps he had brushed against something sharp or scratched himself in his sleep. But the scratches persisted, often appearing in places he couldn't easily reach. Sometimes the marks were raw and fresh, appearing seemingly out of nowhere. Before long, Tony also began to complain of unexpected hot or cold spots that followed him through the house. At certain times, he would walk from a hallway into the living room and feel as though he had suddenly stepped into a freezer. The changes in temperature were striking enough to stand out in the usually warm environment of a Kansas home. Around this time, a friend of the family who claimed to possess some psychic sensitivity visited the Pickmans. Almost immediately upon stepping inside, she reported feeling the presence of a young girl. With gentle curiosity, the friend addressed the spirit directly, referring to it as Sallie, without any knowledge of the local legend. The friend's spontaneous mention of the girl's name sent a chill through the Pickmans, who had only vaguely heard that a ghostly little girl was rumored to haunt the premises. The psychic friend went on to say that Sallie seemed drawn to Tony. This revelation corresponded with Tony's increasingly frightening experiences, and in some retellings, Sallie appeared not only drawn to Tony but also seemed to want to be a part of the family, even taking on a protective role toward the baby. If this was the spirit of a young girl who had perished so tragically, why was Tony being targeted with physical harm? Confusion took root, and the notion of a vengeful child ghost began to swirl in the couple's minds, though no one was certain yet what they were dealing with. What had once been a mild series of strange occurrences now grew into an aura of foreboding. Tony, who had dismissed the eerie sensations, found himself deeply disturbed by the unexplained scratches appearing on his skin. Debra became increasingly anxious, worried for the safety of their newborn. To make matters worse, visitors began to report being touched or pushed in certain rooms, particularly near the entrance to the nursery. Tony's brother, who had a more skeptical outlook than most, left the house one evening after feeling a sharp, stinging sensation on his arm, as if scratched by invisible fingernails. He told Tony the next day that he found 3 tiny welts. Though Tony and Debra attempted to maintain a normal daily routine, fear began to dominate their lives. Their interactions with friends turned more tense as they struggled to explain the inexplicable, and yet the worst was still to come. Before long, Tony began to see fleeting shapes out of the corner of his eye. At first, these sightings were so quick that he could almost shrug them off as tricks of peripheral vision. However, the momentary silhouettes gradually transformed into more coherent manifestations. The most frequent appearance was that of a young girl with long hair, widely identified as Sallie, but Tony also caught fleeting glimpses of other shadowy figures. Sometimes he noticed a somber silhouette near the kitchen window, or a dark, vague shape slipping silently through the living room, each adding to the pervasive sense of unease. Some nights, Tony heard what sounded like light footsteps running down the hallway. Debra recalled hearing disembodied giggles and occasionally distant sobs, though these eerie sounds emanated from corners of a room or just behind a closed door, far from where either of them was standing. Despite the childlike quality of these noises, they carried a deep undercurrent of heartbreak and anger. In one particularly baffling instance, the name Sallie was found written on an art board in their son's room, a mystery since he was too young to write, further deepening the enigma of the presence that haunted the house. Tony's interaction with whatever entity lingered in the house became more violent. The scratches on his arms and torso grew more frequent, some deep enough to draw blood. Photographs from this period taken by friends and reporters show red welts in distinct claw-like patterns. Tony himself admitted that he would feel the burning sensation almost instantly, as if an unseen force were marking him. He became anxious about being alone in the house, often leaving lights and the TV on at night for comfort. Debra, although not physically attacked, felt the oppressive atmosphere growing heavier by the day. While the couple had initially believed they could coexist with a spirit they assumed might be a lonely child, the unrelenting violence toward Tony indicated that something else, something possibly malevolent, was at play. Poltergeist phenomena soon took hold. Objects were flung off shelves, furniture shook, and items disappeared only to reappear in inexplicable places. In one widely reported incident, knives flew off the kitchen countertop, narrowly missing Tony. Friends who visited bore witness to utensils and small household items sliding across tables or dropping straight to the floor without an apparent cause. Debra's mother, initially skeptical of this supernatural explanation, witnessed a photo frame launch itself off a shelf and crash into a nearby wall. On occasion, unexplained fires would break out in the house, intensifying the fear that something malignant was at work. Desperate for answers, the couple sought help from various sources: local clergy, paranormal investigators, and psychics. The local priest performed a house blessing, but the activity persisted. Investigators set up cameras and recording devices, capturing orbs of light, strange mist, and disembodied voices. However, each new attempt at understanding the haunting seemed only to embolden the phenomena, escalating tensions within the household. The question on everyone's mind became who or what was tormenting Tony. Multiple psychics who visited their home claimed there were at least 2 spirits present. One was said to be the spirit of a young girl named Sallie, who might have died from a botched appendectomy. Another presence was described as older, more malevolent, a possible dark entity masquerading as a child or even controlling the spirit of a child. In an attempt to communicate directly, investigators organized seances and spirit board sessions. Some claimed to have made contact with a crying child who expressed anger and confusion at her fate. Others reported encountering a manipulative presence that refused to identify itself. Tony often felt physically ill during these sessions, experiencing burning sensations across his chest or sharp pains in his abdomen. He frequently left the room mid-session, unable to cope with the sudden distress. Witnesses attested to seeing fresh scratches appear on Tony's skin in real time during these events. Amateur historians and paranormal researchers delve into the archives of Atchison's historical records, searching for proof of a girl named Sallie who might have died in the house. While no definitive evidence emerged of a Sallie matching the legend's specifics, documents did confirm that doctors had once lived in the property and used part of the house for medical purposes. Some pointed to the incomplete nature of 19th century record keeping. It was entirely possible that a child could have died there without leaving a clear paper trail. Additionally, rumors circulated about other tragedies linked to the house. Stories of a woman who died under suspicious circumstances, or of children rumored to have passed away from disease. While none of these tales were officially verified in historical records, they contributed to the ever-growing aura of mystery. The unrelenting stress took its toll on Tony. He grew increasingly anxious, prone to insomnia and nightmares. The violent scratchings on his body and the overwhelming sense of being stalked wore down his resolve. Friends described him as a different man, haunted, distrustful, and visibly exhausted. Debra too was fraught with worry over her husband's deteriorating condition. She feared for their baby's safety and questioned whether remaining in the house was a mistake. Yet, finances and a lease agreement made it difficult for them to simply walk away. They had poured their hearts into making this place a home, and the idea of leaving felt like conceding defeat to an unseen force that seemed determined to break them. One particularly harrowing event occurred around Christmas time when Tony and Debra tried to bring some holiday cheer into their troubled home. They decorated a Christmas tree in the living room, hoping to shift the mood. Late one night, Tony heard a crash and rushed into the living room to find the tree toppled over, ornaments scattered across the floor. Shaken but determined, he and Debra propped it back up and secured it. Shortly after they returned to bed, another crash sounded. The tree was on its side again, and the lights were flickering as if someone were pulling the plug in and out of the socket. The couple could only stare at the mess in disbelief and growing fear. This event shattered any lingering hopes they might have harbored that the presence was merely a mischief-making child. As word of the family's ordeal spread, various television programs and paranormal investigators became interested in the Sallie House. Tony and Debra agreed to participate in televised investigations, hoping these might yield answers or at least documentation of the strange events. Camera crews from channels specializing in paranormal programming set up equipment, capturing orbs, temperature shifts, and even audible growls. One cameraman reportedly felt a sharp jolt in his arm, claiming it felt like he had been grabbed. The attention from the media led to more scrutiny from skeptics who accused the couple of fabricating the haunting for fame or financial gain. However, the fear in Tony's eyes, the documented injuries, and the consistent eyewitness accounts from friends and family largely dispelled the notion of a hoax. Tony and Debra were not enjoying this attention. If anything, they seemed desperate for a solution that would allow them to live in peace. One of the most frightening incidents occurred late one night when Tony was abruptly wakened by a burning sensation across his back. Debra, startled by his screams, turned on the light to find 3 long, bloody scratches running from his shoulder blade down to his lower back. Tony could barely breathe from the pain and the shock. Debra checked the bedding, searching for any sharp object, but found nothing. The couple stayed awake the rest of the night, both shaken to their core, certain that whatever haunted their house had escalated its attack to a terrifying degree. Fed up and angry, Tony attempted to confront whatever was harming him. Standing in the middle of the living room, he shouted at the empty air, demanding the spirit leave them alone. He recalled feeling a sudden suffocating pressure as if invisible hands were closing around his throat. The invisible chokehold released only when Debra physically pulled him away from that spot. The next morning, Debra discovered bruises around Tony's neck, faint but shaped like finger marks. That was the breaking point for both of them. Unable to endure more torment, Tony and Debra made the decision to leave the Sallie House. They hastily moved out in the mid-1990s, seeking refuge with Tony's family until they could find another place to live. Their departure did not immediately lift the weight of what they had experienced. Tony in particular wrestled with nightmares and anxiety for years to come. Once they were gone, other residents and occasional caretakers reported continued strange activity. Some claimed that the house retained the same oppressively tense atmosphere, although none of the subsequent occupants stayed long enough to face what the Pickmans had endured. The house sat empty for significant periods, and its haunted reputation only grew. Capitalizing on this notoriety, the new owner eventually decided that rather than renting the property as a conventional residence, he could generate more income by leasing it to ghost hunters and paranormal investigators, ensuring that the eerie legacy of the Sallie House would continue to attract both skeptics and believers alike. Renowned paranormal teams visited over the years, many of them documenting unexplained occurrences, footsteps, electrical disturbances, and even more unsettling physical sensations. Several investigators left with scratches that mirrored Tony's experiences, adding further credibility to his story. While some visitors felt an innocent child's presence, others believed that something far more sinister lurked in the shadows, capitalizing on Sallie's tragic story as a cover for malevolent intentions. In interviews conducted years after they moved out, Tony and Debra maintained that their experiences were genuine and deeply traumatic. They acknowledged that skeptics would always doubt their account, but emphasized that the terrifying events they lived through were too consistent and too physically documented to simply dismiss as imagination. Neither Tony nor Debra had sought fame from this haunting. In fact, they appeared deeply relieved to have left that chapter of their lives behind. Tony sometimes remarked on how normal life seemed once they were away from the house. The scratches ceased and the relentless fear subsided. Still, the memories never left him. Debra described the ordeal as a trial by fire, one that tested their faith, their sanity, and their bond as a couple. They both admitted that the mental scars might never fully heal. The end. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And until next time, hasta luego. Bye.